Welcome back to the channel, my friends. Tonight we're diving deep into the shadows, exploring abandoned military bases. These silent giants hold more than just crumbling concrete and rusted metal. They harbor secrets, memories, and sometimes something far more sinister. Now let the chills commence. Let the Our first story takes us to the desolate plains of Texas, to the ruins of Fort Courage, a once bustling training ground for soldiers, now reduced to crumbling structures and overgrown weeds. They say this fort saw its fair share of tragedy during its active years: accidents, suicides, even a few unexplained deaths during training exercises. Years after the fort was abandoned, a group of friends decided to explore the decaying buildings one warm summer night. The air hung heavy and still as they approached the main gate, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. The rusted bars of the gate, twisted and broken, offered little resistance as they slipped onto the grounds. As they ventured deeper into the fort, a sense of unease settled over them. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel. The buildings, shrouded in darkness, seemed to loom over them, their empty windows watching their every move. They decided to explore the old barracks first, a long two-story building with rows of broken windows that looked out onto the parade ground. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay. As they moved through the shadowy corridors, they noticed something strange: paw prints on the dusty floor. Large canine prints, far too big to belong to a stray dog. One of the friends, a cocky young man named Jake, laughed it off, suggesting it was probably just a coyote that had wandered in. But the others weren't so sure. They pressed on, their unease growing with each step. They reached the end of the hallway and found themselves facing a door slightly ajar. A pale light, like moonlight filtering through fog, spilled out from the room beyond. Jake, emboldened by bravado, pushed the door open with a creak that echoed through the silent building. The room was bare except for a single wooden chair in the center, and sitting on that chair, bathed in the strange, ethereal light, was a large, shadowy figure. It resembled a dog, but it was far too big, far too muscular to be any breed they recognized. Its eyes, two glowing embers in the darkness, locked onto them, and a low growl rumbled deep within its chest. The friends froze, their blood turning to ice in their veins. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the creature vanished. The light faded, plunging the room back into darkness. Panic seized the group. They stumbled back, their courage evaporating into the stale air. As they fled the barracks, they could hear the heavy sound of paws padding behind them, gaining on them with every step. Our next tale takes us to the windswept deserts of Nevada, to the desolate airfield known as Area 52. Shrouded in secrecy and whispered rumors of government experiments and alien encounters, Area 52 has captivated the imaginations of conspiracy theorists and paranormal enthusiasts for decades. But beyond the veil of secrecy lies something far more unsettling: the lingering echoes of pain and suffering. Our story centers on Hangar 13, a dilapidated structure located on the edge of the airfield. Locals tell tales of strange lights and unexplained activity around the hangar, claiming it was once used for medical experiments on captured UFO pilots. Whether these rumors hold any truth remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: Hangar 13 is a place of palpable dread. One night, a young photographer named Sarah decided to brave the dangers of Area 52, hoping to capture evidence of the strange happenings that had made the base infamous. Armed with her camera and a flashlight, she navigated the treacherous dirt roads until she reached the imposing silhouette of Hangar 13. The wind howled around her as she approached the hangar, whipping sand against her face and making her shiver despite the desert heat. The metal siding of the hangar groaned and creaked in the wind, like an animal in pain. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The interior of the hangar was dark and cavernous, lit only by Sarah's flashlight beam. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated like tiny stars. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she began to make out the shapes of old medical equipment scattered across the floor: gurneys, IV stands, even an operating table, all covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. A wave of nausea washed over Sarah. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and antiseptic, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing in a place of immense suffering. As she made her way deeper into the hangar, she noticed something strange, a faint humming sound, like the electrical hum of medical equipment. She followed the sound to the far end of the hangar, where she found a door slightly ajar. A pale, flickering light spilled out from the room beyond. Cautiously, Sarah pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and cramped, with a single window overlooking the airfield. In the center of the room stood an old operating table, illuminated by a single overhead light that flickered erratically, and standing over the table, his back to Sarah, was a figure dressed in a faded military uniform. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't make out the figure's face, but his uniform looked old, like something out of a World War II documentary. She cleared her throat nervously. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the small room. The figure didn't respond. He continued to stare down at the operating table, his shoulders slumped as if he were carrying a heavy weight. Sarah took a step closer, her hand trembling as she raised her camera to her eye. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just a photographer. I didn't know anyone was here." The figure slowly turned to face her, and Sarah gasped. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and hollow, but it was his mouth that truly terrified her. It was stretched into a wide, grotesque grin, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. Sarah stumbled back, dropping her camera to the floor with a clatter. The figure took a step towards her, his grin widening, and Sarah could see that his eyes were filled with a cold, predatory hunger. She turned and fled, her blood turning to ice in her veins. She could hear the figure's heavy footsteps pounding behind her as she raced out of the hangar and into the night. Chapter 3. The Unseen Prisoner of Cell Block C. Our final tale takes us to the fog-choked coastline of California, to the imposing structure of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Once home to some of the most notorious criminals in American history, Alcatraz has since become a chilling monument to the darker side of the human spirit. But beyond the bars and cells, something more sinister lingers, a darkness that permeates the very walls, a despair that seems to cling to the island like the ever-present fog. Our story takes place in Cell Block C, known as the Hole, during the prison's operation. This section of Alcatraz was reserved for the most difficult and dangerous inmates, those who had earned the ire of the guards or posed a threat to the other prisoners. It was a place of isolation and sensory deprivation, designed to break the spirit of even the most hardened criminal. Years after Alcatraz was decommissioned, a group of paranormal investigators decided to spend the night in the Hole, hoping to capture evidence of the residual energy that was said to linger within its walls. They were a seasoned group, accustomed to the chills and thrills of their chosen field, but nothing could have prepared them for the horrors that awaited them in Cell Block C. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the island, the investigators made their way to the Hole, their equipment in tow. The air grew noticeably colder as they approached the cell block, and a thick silence descended upon them, broken only by the distant cry of a gull. They unlocked the heavy steel door and stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and a palpable sense of dread hung over the cell block. The cells were small and cramped, with only a cot, a toilet, and a sink. The walls were bare concrete, scratched and defaced with graffiti left by the prisoners who had once called this place home. The investigators split up, each taking a different cell to monitor their equipment. As the night wore on, they began to hear strange noises, whispers, footsteps, and even the faint sound of chains dragging across the floor. The temperature dropped, sending shivers down their spines. One of the investigators, a young woman named Emily, began to feel uneasy. She was stationed in a cell at the end of the block, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She kept hearing a soft tapping sound coming from inside her cell, as if someone were knocking on the wall from the inside. At first she dismissed it as her imagination, but the tapping persisted, growing louder with each passing moment. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, she cautiously approached the wall where she had heard the sound. She placed her ear against the cold concrete and listened intently. The tapping was definitely coming from inside the wall, and it seemed to be getting closer. She could hear a faint scratching sound now, as if someone were trying to claw their way out. Terror gripped Emily's heart. She stumbled back from the wall, her eyes wide with fear. She fumbled for her flashlight and shone it at the wall, but there was nothing there, just the cold, hard concrete. Suddenly the lights flickered and died, plunging the cell block into darkness. Emily screamed, her voice echoing through the empty corridors. She could hear the other investigators shouting, their voices filled with panic. Then she heard it, a guttural growl coming from just inches from her face. Something cold and wet brushed against her cheek, and she felt a searing pain in her arm. She screamed again, collapsing to the floor in terror. The shadows are long, the air is cold, and the stories linger. These abandoned military bases stand as silent sentinels, their crumbling walls whispering tales of terror to those who dare to listen. Until next time, sleep tight, if you can.